In the year 204 BCE, on a hot, sweltering day, a flat barge slowly made its way up the Tiber River toward Rome. A crowd gathered on the riverbank, anxiously awaiting the boat's cargo. Rome was in the throes of the Second Punic War. Hannibal had been laying siege to Rome for over a decade, blocking food supplies and trying to incite Italian cities to rebel, and the citizens of Rome feared that they were about to be defeated. The crowd waiting on the banks of the Tiber River included Claudia Quinta, a well-known matriarch of the city. Until recently, Claudia had been known as a respectable woman, but in recent weeks rumors had begun to circulate that she was not chaste, not faithful to her marriage vows. Claudia Quinta waited with Scipio Nasica, a well-known patriarch of the city. The two had been selected as city elders to welcome the ship's precious cargo, a meteoric stone that Romans had come to view as the incarnation of Cybele, the great mother goddess. Suddenly, the ship caught on a sandbar and it wouldn't budge. For a moment, it seemed as if the goddess would not make it to Rome. And then, Claudia Quinta began to pray out loud. She prayed to the Great Mother to release the ship. The poet Ovid describes what happened next. A droughty season had the river dried, high were the banks of sand, and low the tide. To drag the ship along they pull and strain, but all their labor, all their toil is vain. But Claudia Quinta happened to be there, a lady great by birth as well as fair, and truly chaste, though false yet common fame had long deprived her of her better name. Then to the sacred image turned her head, and falling on her knees this prayer made: If I am guiltless, goddess, deign to show some sign that all my innocence may know. If chaste, let not the ship unmoving stand, but as I draw it, follow my chaste hand. So she said, and gave the ship a gentle hail, when to the great amazement of them all, the ship began along the stream to glide, and took her course, as Claudia was her guide. Miraculously, the barge pulled free. Claudia stepped into the waters and began to tow the ship single-handedly to shore. The story spread like wildfire, and Romans came to believe two things. First, the great mother goddess had freely chosen to come to Rome, which suggested that she would save Rome from defeat by Hannibal. Second, she had chosen to do so in a way that publicly established Claudia's virtue. This is one of the most well-developed legends centered on Cybele, a key figure in Roman mythology. Cybele, usually spelled Cybele, and a distinct figure from the Sibylline oracles, has roots that extend back many millennia in human history. In this lecture, we'll examine the great mother goddess mythology. We'll note how it changed over time, adapting to different cultural environments, and we'll look at how Claudia Quinta's connection to the great mother goddess reflected Roman class relations. Part of what makes Cybele intriguing as a Roman mythological figure is that Cybele wasn't actually Roman at all. She came from Asia. Cybele's origins have been traced back to Anatolia, the westernmost portion of Asia, roughly the area in which modern-day Turkey is situated. The oldest known image of a proto-Cybele figure is a baked clay nude female figurine dated to the 6th millennium BCE. The woman appears to be calmly giving birth while seated on a throne, resting her hands on armrests shaped like feline heads. This figure, known as the Seated Woman of Çatalhöyük, was discovered in 1961, and it's viewed as a classic Neolithic fertility goddess figure. Evidence indicates that the Great Mother continued as an object of worship in Asia Minor throughout the next several centuries. For example, archaeologists have associated a large rock carving found in Asia Minor with ancient Mother Goddess worship. A gigantic seated female figure is carved into the rock just north of Mount Sleepless in the Aegean region of Turkey. Now, this sculpture, which begins roughly 100 meters up from the ground and then rises 8 to 10 meters high, is dated to the first half of the 6th century BCE. It's inscribed with the phrase, "Mother of the Mountain." Legend has it that this mountain was a favorite place of the ancient Mother Goddess. We know that this particular rock shrine was still an object of worship for the Magnesians, an ancient Greek community as late as the 2nd century CE. Flash forward a little bit in time. Around the 6th century BCE, the Greek colonies extended into western Anatolia. The Greeks absorbed the Anatolian mother goddess into their own mythological tradition. For example, the Greek tradition taught that the colossal rock shrine near Mount Sleepless was created by Proteus the hunter, the ugly son of Tantalus, who was the ruler of Sleepless and a son of Zeus. In another myth, the rock carving was said to be Niobe, Proteus' sister, who turned into stone after her children were murdered by Apollo and Artemis. Whatever the case, the Greeks came to think of this figure as the mother of the gods. From the early 5th century BCE, the mother goddess came to be known by a specific name, Cybele the Mother, as well as Mistress of Animals. In this period, Cybele continued to be associated with mountains and wild animals, especially lions, as well as with fertility. In images, she is almost always accompanied by lions. Sometimes they are standing guard beside her, and sometimes they are pulling her in a chariot. To some extent, Cybele became assimilated with Gaia, the earth goddess in Greek mythology. Some scholars argue that she was also assimilated with Rhea, the mother of Zeus, and with the corn mother goddess Demeter. Cybele was a divisive figure. While many Greeks adopted her worship, others totally rejected her. Herodotus, the Greek historian, claims that Anacharsis, a Scythian, was actually put to death by his own brother for taking on Greek ways, especially worshipping Cybele. Even among the Greeks, a kind of love-hate relationship developed with Cybele. Over time, she became associated with town and city walls as part of her protector function. But this was in some cases driven as much by fear as by adoration. For example, the Athenians built a structure dedicated to Cybele's worship, but only because the citizens believed that she had sent a plague upon the city. For the most part, Cybele was seen as a foreign goddess, as indicated by the fact that she carried a hand drum, a common marker of foreign gods. In this period, she is commonly associated with music, wine, and various forms of debauchery. She was also usually linked with the lower classes, or alternatively to initiates, who practiced a kind of frenetic worship, possibly linked to mystery cults. The mythology of Cybele had been somewhat unformed prior to her arrival in Greece, but in Greece, Cybele's mythology became fully developed. In Greek mythology, Cybele was linked to Attis, a young male figure with roots in the religion of Phrygia, located in western central Anatolia. In the Phrygian religion, Attis alternately appeared as Cybele's consort, as a priest, or as a related but subordinate deity. In Greek mythology about Cybele and Attis, Attis was Cybele's grandson, but she fell in love with him anyway. She pursued Attis, even when he was promised to be married to another. Eventually, Cybele drove Attis mad, and in a crazy frenzy, he castrated himself. Attis's father-in-law to be castrated himself in sympathy with Attis, and these acts supposedly gave rise to the community of eunuchs who served Cybele at her cultic sites. It was not uncommon for Cybele and Attis to share worship at certain worship sites, although Attis always took a back seat to Cybele. Finally, the Great Mother came to Rome. According to historical records, during the Second Punic War in the late 3rd century BCE, omens from the heavens seemed to indicate that Rome was about to experience catastrophic military defeat. Now, these omens were accompanied by natural disasters. Historical records indicate that there was a dramatic meteor shower, and a damaged harvest led to a severe famine. Desperate for relief, the Roman senators consulted the Sibylline oracle, this time spelled Sibyll, and not to be confused with Cybele, the Great Mother. The oracle declared that Rome could defeat her attackers from Carthage if the city offered worship to the Great Mother Goddess. The historian Livy writes that the Roman priests consulted the oracular books and came across an old promise. If ever a foreign foe should carry war into the land of Italy, from Italy he can be driven out and overcome if the Idaean mother shall be brought from Pessinus to Rome. Cybele was the Idaean mother, and Pessinus was a city in Asia Minor, the city from which the mythological king Midas, dated around 738 to 696 BCE, ruled over the ancient kingdom of Phrygia. Based on this oracle, the Roman priests determined that Carthage might be defeated if Rome began to offer worship to the Great Mother of the Phrygian people. The Roman Senate sent ambassadors to obtain permission from the king of Pergamum, since his kingdom controlled the Great Mother cult. According to legend, the goddess came to Rome in the form of a black meteoric stone, although we have no way of knowing where this meteoric stone originated. As described earlier, the Great Mother's arrival on the Tiber River was dramatic. The stories of the Mother Goddess's miraculous arrival bolstered Cybele's status as a goddess, skyrocketing her to popularity, even though she maintained her reputation as a foreign goddess. In addition, according to legend, after the stone was brought to Rome, the famine ended, and soon Rome defeated Hannibal, Carthage's military leader. This sealed Rome's faith in the goddess, who was subsequently hailed as Rome's Great Mother. A great temple was built for her on the Palatine Hill, and an annual festival, the Megalesia, was established in her honor, including annual athletic games. A play was written dramatizing the miracle of the Great Mother's arrival in Rome on the barge. The story of Cybele's dramatic barge ride into Rome was also seen as a validation of the social structure of Rome, particularly the power and the prestige of the prominent families, including leading figures such as Claudia Quinta and Scipio Nasica. Cybele's willingness to be led to shore by Claudia Quinta seemed to suggest that she would cooperate with Rome's leading families, signaling that the Great Mother's power would favor Rome's aristocracy. More broadly, the mythology surrounding the Great Mother Goddess supported the hierarchical social structure of Roman society. Rome's noble families didn't simply dominate the common citizens. The noble families themselves were embroiled in complex and nuanced networks, driven by the concept of patronage, in which individuals and families served or were served by one another. This complex system governed social, political, and financial relationships, and the Great Mother Goddess cult reinforced the system. The Great Mother's very arrival in Rome involved supplication and response, a hallmark of patronage. Thus, the Great Mother reinforced existing Roman tradition, and this is another way in which myth can be powerful. In addition to explaining natural phenomena and human relationships, mythology has been used by certain social groups to justify their dominance over other social groups. At the same time, Cybele took on much greater importance in Rome than she had ever had in Greek mythology. She truly became the Great Mother in Rome, an unequivocally positive figure, associated with Roman victory and dominance. Several Roman stories developed around Cybele. One Roman writer said that Cybele was exposed as a baby by her father, King Meon of Phrygia. Instead of dying, she survived, and she was raised by leopards and other wild animals. There are some strong parallels with Romulus and Remus here. As children, Cybele and the twins were left to die of exposure, but they survived instead, raised by animals in the wild. This ultimately led to the birth and the survival of Rome. It's as if nature herself conspired to save Cybele, Romulus, and Remus in order to establish Rome. According to Roman mythology, as a young woman, Cybele took Attis as her lover, and her father became furious when she became pregnant with Attis's child. In one Roman version of the story, King Meon executed Attis for sleeping with his daughter, and Cybele roamed the countryside in despair. The gods punished King Meon and the Phrygians by sending a drought so that the crops failed. In response to this, the Phrygian people buried Attis properly. There are variations of this story. According to the Roman poet Catullus, Attis was a Greek young man who sailed to Phrygia out of love for Cybele. In an ecstatic moment, he castrated himself. In another version of the story, Attis falls in love with a naiad, a water nymph, leading him to break his vow of faithfulness to Cybele. When Cybele finds out, she kills the naiad. Overwhelmed with grief, Attis castrates himself. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, Attis is then transformed into a tree. Now, all of these stories present variations on the theme of castration, probably as a mythological explanation for the eunuch priests who came from Phrygia in service to Cybele. The castration stories may also reflect Rome's view of Phrygian religion as wild or ecstatic. Roman mythology did a makeover on Cybele when the Romans adopted her as a goddess. Over time, the Romans seem to have domesticated her. In Roman images, the lions and the hawks that accompanied her in Asia Minor disappear, and Cybele's sexual relationship with Attis was allegorized. The Roman version of the Great Mother is a sedate, solitary goddess, pious, and respectable. Roman historians describe her as the mother goddess of ancient Troy and as an ancestral goddess of the Roman people themselves in the genealogy of Aeneas. Cybele even appears in the great Roman national story, the Aeneid. Virgil presents Cybele there not only as Trojan, but as the mother of Jupiter, king of the gods. Cybele comes to the aid of the Trojans, providing them with a grove of sacred trees to build a fleet of ships, and she convinces Jupiter to make these ships indestructible. These enchanted ships make it possible for Aeneas and his men to escape from Troy, thereby protecting the ancestors of Rome. And ultimately, these ships are magically changed into sea nymphs. Over time, the Romans rewrote their more recent history as well. They began to describe Cybele's initial arrival in Rome actually as a return to Rome, claiming that Rome was her true culture of origin. The Romans portrayed themselves as Cybele's true descendants, exiled from her for millennia, but eventually restored to their rightful relationship with the goddess, when she returned in the form of the meteoric stone to her true and ever-loyal people. Simultaneously, all of the images of the Great Mother found scattered throughout Greece and Phrygia were claimed as far-flung property of Rome. Basically, Rome claimed that the Great Mother had gone ahead of her people, reaching out to cultures that were ultimately inferior to Rome, and thus destined to come under Roman rule. Cybele gradually became linked with the imperial order and family. For example, the Empress Livia, who lived between 58 BCE and 29 CE, was characterized as the Great Mother's earthly incarnation, and Roman citizens were expected to show the same level of respect and devotion to Livia that they would show to the goddess herself. The Great Mother was invoked when Rome attempted to wield religious authority over its empire. And eventually, the Great Mother was exported out to the Greek territories that fell under Rome's rule, repackaged as Cybele, Imperial Rome's protector. By this point, Cybele had become completely domesticated. She was no longer linked with mountains. Instead, she was associated with the Roman Empire's cities. And instead of being associated with wild spaces, she was associated with Roman agriculture. She truly became a completely domesticated imperial mother goddess. The wild Cybele makes a final, brief, but strategic appearance in Christian anti-pagan writing. The Christians highlighted her lurid behavior with Attis as a foil for discussions of Christian morality. The most vivid accounts include stories of Christian martyrdom. For example, legend has it that in the early 4th century, Roman soldiers gave Saint Theodore of Amasia time to recant his commitment to Christianity. He's said to have spent that time burning down a temple dedicated to Cybele instead. As punishment, he was tortured and then thrown into a furnace and burned alive. Cybele's transformation over the centuries represents a very common dynamic in world mythology. Like many other mythical figures, she has roots that extend back many millennia in human history. But Cybele is a kind of shape-shifter, maintaining her core mother goddess identity, but surviving and traveling by adapting in form and function to new cultural settings. She offers a classic example of how classic mythological figures transform as they travel from culture to culture over many centuries. The key to surviving these travels is a delicate balance between change and continuity. As we've seen, the mother goddess of ancient Anatolia is markedly different from the Roman Great Mother, Cybele. The Anatolian goddess is a wild woman associated with mountains, lions, and birds of prey. The Roman Cybele, by contrast, is sophisticated, urbane, and polished. She has shed all obvious links to the wild. As I like to tell my students, the Anatolian goddess is the girl you party with in college. The Roman Cybele is the woman you introduce to mom and dad. However, there's a clear thread of continuity that connects the Anatolian, Greek, and Roman mother goddesses. All these figures are associated with fertility. This may seem obvious, but it's worth stating explicitly that for all intents and purposes, every mythological tradition known to us includes a goddess of fertility. This fact alone should make us appreciate the near universal value of fertility. At the same time, it suggests that throughout human history, fertility, both agricultural and human, was not taken for granted. In the modern West, we largely haven't had to think about this very often, but we're actually in the minority. Less obviously, the mother goddess is associated with protection. The form and the focus of that protection shifts as we move from wild local mountain regions to vast urbanized empires. However, the mother goddess's protective role suggests that every human culture craves protection from something, whether it be the natural world, human physical frailty, disease and famine, or the threat of war. In fact, the maternal goddess as a figure may date back to well before the seated woman of Çatalhöyük was ever carved. The oldest fertility figure discovered, the Venus of Willendorf, was found in Austria and dates to 24,000 or 22,000 BCE. Now think about this for a minute. That's 25,000 years ago. And to be fair, this figure isn't seated and she's not accompanied by felines. We don't have any surviving mythology associated with this artifact, but most scholars describe her as a fertility goddess, which seems awfully close to the mother goddess idea. So it's possible that mother goddess mythology dates back 25,000 years ago in human history. And similar mother goddesses have been found in ancient Egypt. in old Celtic Europe, in Native and Mesoamerican mythologies, in Pacific Island communities, and in South and East Asia. While each goddess has distinct features reflecting her individual cultural origins, certain elements seem virtually universal. Carl Jung included a mother figure among his archetypes, arguing that mother imagery was part of the collective unconscious. He believed that mother figures are associated with maternal care, comfort, and sympathy, and also with magical authority, wisdom, and spiritual exaltation. According to Jung, mother figures represent all that is benign, all that cherishes and sustains, and all that fosters growth and fertility. On the negative side, Jung also associated the mother figure with everything secret, hidden and dark, with the world of the dead, with anything that devours, seduces, and poisons, and with everything that is terrifying and inescapable, such as fate. Jung may go a little too far in his argument that certain archetypes permeate a collective unconscious. But he does seem to be onto something in noting that almost every culture we know of includes great mother goddesses, and these figures often exhibit a dual nature, nurturing and sympathetic on the one hand, seductive and sometimes terrifying on the other hand. Other scholars have explained the presence of mother goddesses by pointing out that since all human life begins with birth and nurturing from a mother, it's natural for the mother to become a foundational cultural symbol of agricultural fertility, the creation of the material world, and the source of spiritual life. Our conversation about the mother goddess would not be complete without noting her conspicuous absence in certain cultures. Communities dominated by the Abrahamic religious traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, largely lack a powerful female or mother goddess. While noting the importance of strong women such as Sarah, the Virgin Mary, and Fatima, it's clear that these traditions are dominated by male gods. Scholars have offered many different explanations for this, noting in particular that the Abrahamic traditions intentionally suppressed pagan and polytheistic traditions that featured powerful female deities. Recently in the modern West, small groups within these dominant patriarchal traditions have tried to correct this problem. Often they point to feminine qualities and even metaphors used to describe the Abrahamic male god. Other groups are reviving cults focused on mother goddesses that were suppressed or driven underground centuries ago. In other parts of the world, as Christianity spread, mother goddesses, along with other female deities, were absorbed into dominant religious traditions. For example, the Inca worshipped a fertility goddess known as Pachamama, who watched over the harvest. She was also responsible for earthquakes. When the Spanish Catholics conquered the Inca, Pachamama didn't entirely disappear. Instead, she became conflated with the Virgin Mary, never quite disappearing. Native stories about Pachamama were altered a bit, and then associated loosely with Mary. And Pachamama is still explicitly linked with the Virgin Mary in parts of Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and Peru. In many regions of Central and South America, mother fertility goddess worship continues, conflated with European Christianity. In our day, we're seeing a revival of interest in mother goddess mythology. Inspired by feminist thought in the 1970s, many communities have come together to revive appreciation for the so-called pagan traditions that emphasize goddesses, especially mother and female creator goddesses. Scholars such as Carol Christ, Mary Daly, and Starhawk have worked to bring ancient myths about the mother goddess into contemporary conversations about socioeconomic equality and green living. In our next lectures, we leave the Mediterranean behind, moving to European mythology, beginning with the Celtic traditions. On the surface, everything appears to be different. The climate's different, history, politics, and the body of mythology. We turn away from the great military campaigns of Greece and Rome. And it seems for a moment that we are entering an entirely new world. But on second glance, we find the great mother goddess mythology there too. We'll see that Freya, the Norse mother goddess, is associated with love, beauty, fertility, gold, war, and death. And she rides a chariot pulled by two cats. In the Celtic tradition, the mother goddess is Anu, sometimes called Danu. She's often presented as the mother to the Dagda, the great father figure to a special ancient Celtic tribe. In fact, this tribe, the Tuath de Danann, is named for her. Their name means people of the goddess Danu. Danu is associated predictably with fertility, and in some traditions she is linked with the land and the waters of Ireland. And finally, like other mother goddesses, she is also associated with protection. As we turn from the ancient Greek and Roman myth traditions to European mythology, we'll see that much of this mythology reflects the specific geography, history, and culture of Europe. But it's interesting to see that the European traditions, like virtually all others, will reference a mother goddess figure. The mother goddess mythology, it seems, is everywhere, perhaps tying human cultures together across time and space with a common mythological thread. According to Irish mythology, in ancient times there was a figure known as the Dagda, often translated the good god. The Dagda was a giant, mighty warrior who led the army of the Tuatha de Danann, an ancient race of beings named after the goddess Danu. The Dagda owned several magical items, including a magical harp made of carved oak and covered in jewels. When the Dagda played the harp, he could make things happen, causing men and women to behave as he desired, even placing the seasons into order. This ancient race entered a great battle with the Fomorians, an enemy force of one-armed, one-legged beings from under the sea. During this battle, the Dagda's harp was stolen by the Fomorians because they thought they could defeat the Tuatha de Danann once they had the harp. The Fomorians took the Dagda's harp to a faraway place where they thought the Dagda and his army could never find them. They celebrated their triumph with a banquet, confident that they had captured the harp permanently and they could use it for their own purposes. However, the harp responded only to its master. Sensing the separation, the harp began to call out for the Dagda, and even from miles away, the Dagda could hear the harp's song. He and his army followed the sweet strains of the harp, and very shortly they arrived at the enemy's banquet. The Dagda called out, "Come to me, my harp." The harp, recognizing its master's voice, flew into the Dagda's arms, and then the Dagda sounded the harp 3 times. First, the Dagda played a chord designed to reduce the enemy to tears. Soon, Fomorian men, women, and children were weeping uncontrollably. When the enemy army tried to pick up its weapons to fight, the Dagda plucked a second chord. This time, it caused the Fomorian warriors to laugh uncontrollably. They laughed so hard that they couldn't hold on to their weapons. Soon their spears and their clubs were clattering to the floor, and eventually the warriors themselves collapsed, exhausted from laughing. And then the Dagda sounded the harp a 3rd time. So goes one of the most famous Irish myths of all time. Don't worry, we'll come back to the story, and I'll tell you what happened when he played the harp a 3rd time. But to appreciate it properly, you first need to understand a little bit about the Celtic mythological world that this story comes from. It's best not to think of the Celts as a unified people, but as a loose association of several different tribal groups connected by language and ethnic elements spread across England and Ireland. The true Celtic period begins roughly 800 to 700 BCE. By the 1st century CE, with the expansion of Christianity, Celtic tradition had pretty much become confined to Ireland. Now, much of ancient Celtic history is murky. Stories of the past were passed down orally, not in written form. In addition, Celtic history and mythology blended fluidly with one another, so it's difficult to distinguish between fact and fiction. Celtic mythology includes a wide range of stories, including myths of creation, of the land we know of as Ireland and the United Kingdom, and of the peoples who came and went and ruled over that land. The ancient Celtic mythology records how these people understood their place in the world, in relationship to nature, and to various living beings who walked the earth. Much of Celtic mythology in Britain was destroyed or rewritten by the Romans when they colonized the British Isles, and by Christianity when it became the dominant religious force in Europe. However, Irish mythology was better preserved. Specifically, ancient Christian monks sent to missionize the Celts preserved the Celtic myths, and we know these stories largely through their efforts. The stories we know are contained in several key manuscripts. The documents go back to the 12th through the 14th centuries, but they claim to describe events that occurred many centuries earlier. For example, the Book of the Dun Cow contains numerous myths recorded on a vellum manuscript back in the 1100s. It's called the Book of the Dun Cow because tradition teaches that the stories are actually written on the hide of a dun cow, specifically the hide of the cow said to have followed St. Kieran to the Abbey of Clonmacnoise. This story is probably apocryphal, but it may have contributed to the preservation and transmission of the Book of the Dun Cow stories. The collection includes a history of a series of invasions of Ireland, genealogies and adventure stories about warrior heroes and kings, romances and tragedies, and legends about otherworldly beings. Ancient Irish mythology is dominated by stories about invasions. Warriors engaged in battle using sheer brawn coupled with magical powers. The most famous invasions are said to have occurred after a great flood that occurred many ages ago. According to the tradition, Ireland survived the flood. Coming out of it, the island was occupied by an ancient race known as the Fomorians, the beings I mentioned earlier who attempted to capture the Dante's harp. These beings were dark and powerful. The Fomorians were not gods themselves. Instead, they are said to predate the gods. In a way, they parallel the Titans in Greek mythology. According to the Irish tradition, the Fomorians survived a number of invasions by other groups, always defeating their enemies, until the Tuatha Dé Danann arrived. The Tuatha Dé Danann, literally the people of the goddess Danu, are understood to be a race of supernatural, otherworldly beings with magical abilities. Think of the elves in The Lord of the Rings, and you've got a rough sense of them. Most scholars believe that the Tuatha Dé Danann were ancient kings and queens who were eventually elevated to godlike status in the mythology. It's also possible that they are based on the gods worshipped by ancient Gaelic people before Christianity came to dominate as a religion. According to the mythological history, the Tuatha Dé Danann came to Ireland in dark clouds, wielding magical powers. The Book of Invasions records, they landed with horror, with lofty deed, in their cloud of mighty combat of spectres, upon a mountain of Clonmacnoise of Connacht. The truth was not known beneath the sky of stars, whether they were of heaven or of earth. Eventually, the Tuatha Dé Danann defeated the Fomorians and drove them into the sea. The Tuatha Dé Danann defeated a series of peoples after that, until finally another group of beings, the Milesians, came from the sea and defeated the people of the goddess Danu. The Milesians can be thought of as the first human beings. The defeated Tuatha Dé Danann leaders asked for a truce of 3 days to prepare to leave the island, and they asked that during this period the Milesians not attempt to land on the island. The Milesians agreed. But then the Tuatha Dé Danann used their magical powers to cause a great wind to arise, hoping to drive the Milesian fleet away. Instead, a Milesian poet, Avergan began to speak magical verses, and he calmed the wind and the waters. At this point, the Milesians invaded the island and defeated the Tuatha once and for all. In the terms for peace, the Milesians were given the right to live above the earth, while the Tuatha were restricted to life in the ground. Literally, they were commanded to live in the hillsides and in the mounds of earth that dot the countryside. As a result, the very land, the earth of Ireland, is said to be inhabited by otherworldly beings. The Tuatha continue to have a presence in Ireland right up to this day, living in a parallel, alternate reality to the world we know. Now, officially and to outsiders, no educated Irishman admits to believing in these beings. But when locals relax a bit, they tell stories of encountering otherworldly entities on a regular basis. The stories that grow out of this mythological history focus to a large extent on heroes, elaborating on their lives and accomplishments. The best-known heroes are Cuchulainn and Lugh, a war hero and subsequent king of the Tuatha. Cuchulainn's mythology covers his entire lifetime, using every event as an opportunity to display his physical strength and his character. He's the grandson of the King of Ulster and nephew of the king, King Conor. As a young child, he learns one day that any man who takes up arms on that specific day will be destined for greatness as a warrior. Eagerly, Cuchulainn takes hold of the greatest weapons available, so eagerly, in fact, that he ignores the second half of the prophecy. Whoever takes up arms that day will indeed become a famous warrior, but he will also die young. And Cuchulainn fulfills both of these prophecies. In addition to great strength and skill with weapons, Cuchulainn is known for great moral character. One famous medieval story called The Training of Cuchulainn demonstrates this. It describes Cuchulainn landing on a shore where he sees a beautiful young maiden surrounded by a crowd of 100 men and 100 weeping women. This maiden explains that they are about to be given as tribute to a wild band of Fomorians who come every 7 years to carry off the firstborn child of the king. As she finishes talking, the Fomorians appear on the horizon. While everyone else flees, Cuchulainn remains beside her. And when a brutish Fomorian arrives on shore, he laughs loudly and puffs his chest out with pride, thinking that the Fomorians are also receiving Cuchulainn as part of their tribute. In a famous line, Cuchulainn declares, "It would not be right for him to brag thus regarding me if he knew what would come of it." When the Fomorian tries to take Cuchulainn captive, our hero pulls out his sword and cuts off the Fomorian's head. This is declared to be the first man that Cuchulainn slays after completing his training as a warrior. Cuchulainn is also famous for killing, in self-defense, a ferocious guard dog that was stationed to protect an entire city. When the people of this city realized what he had done, they complained that they'd been left without a guard to defend the city. So Cuchulainn offered to take the hound's place until a new guard could be trained. Several stories highlight Cuchulainn's honor. In one story, he competes in a contest, defeating 2 other men. However, the 2 other men, angry at their loss, challenge his victory. Curragh, the host of the event and a wizard with magical powers, takes on a disguise and invites each competitor to chop off his head if they agree to let him then return and cut off their heads. The competitors agree to his bargain. When they cut off Curragh's head, he simply picks up his head and walks away. When he returns and demands that they live up to their end of the agreement, the competitors flee, behaving dishonorably by failing to let Curragh cut off their heads as they had promised. Cuchulainn, by contrast, behaves honorably. He kneels down and bares his neck, and Curragh spares his life, declaring him the champion. Cuchulainn is a moral man, but he's not flawless, and he experiences personal loss. Irish mythology teaches that he killed his own son unwittingly. According to the legend, Cuchulainn fathered a son whom he never met. Years later, the son comes to find his father, and Cuchulainn, mistaking him for an intruder, stabs him with his sword, killing him, and Cuchulainn is left in despair. Because of his immense physical strength, Cuchulainn cannot be killed by sheer force, so he's killed by ingenuity. His enemies take advantage of his commitment to living as an honorable man. Like most heroes, Cuchulainn lives with one taboo, that is, one action he's forbidden from taking. He's forbidden from eating dog meat. The idea of a taboo or forbidden action is not unusual among mythological heroes. The restriction on behavior creates a tension in their mythology. You never quite know when circumstances will arise that force a hero to perform the forbidden act. In Cuchulainn's case, an old woman, prompted by Cuchulainn's enemies, invites him to eat a meal made with dog meat. Now, the laws of Irish hospitality prevented Cuchulainn from turning down the food, so he eats, even though dog meat has been forbidden to him. This act weakens him, and he becomes vulnerable. He is then attacked by Lugav, who fatally wounds him with a magical spear or a sword, the sword of Lugav. Even at this point, Cuchulainn refuses to collapse. He ties himself to a pillar to remain standing. Lugav only approaches Cuchulainn when a crow comes to rest on his shoulder, and Lugav realizes that Cuchulainn is dead. At this point, Lugav cuts off his head, and Cuchulainn falls. Think of the scene in The Lord of the Rings when it takes 4 large arrows to kill the great warrior Boromir. Cuchulainn is like this. He's no ordinary mortal. It takes multiple wounds and decapitation to finally take him down for good. Cuchulainn was in the Ulster family lineage, but other lineages in Irish history also have their own hero figures. As I mentioned, the Tuatha Dé Danann entered into battle with the Fomorians, led by their own hero, Lugh. Lugh's father was from the Tuatha Dé Danann, but his mother came from a royal Fomorian family. There are lots of stories about Lugh, but the best known is the story of his coming to Tara, located in County Meath, in east-central Ireland. Lugh came to Tara to try to join the army of the Tuatha Dé Danann. According to the myth, the doorkeeper for the king of Tara would not allow Lugh to join the army unless he could demonstrate that he had a skill that no other warrior possessed. Lugh described his ability as a swordsman, but the army already had a skilled swordsman. Lugh described his ability as a blacksmith, but the doorkeeper said that the army already included a skilled blacksmith as well. Lugh continued to list his abilities as a craftsman, a poet, a harpist, and a physical strong man, but each time the doorkeeper declared that another warrior already possessed each skill. Finally, Lugh asked if any man in the king's army could offer all of those skills combined, and the doorkeeper let Lugh in. Ultimately, Lugh becomes the commander of the Tuatha Dé Danann army, and he leads them in battle against the Fomorians. He defeats their leader by using his slingshot to shoot a stone into the Fomorian commander's head, slinging it so forcefully that the commander's eye comes out the back of his head. Lugh then spares another warrior's life on the condition that this warrior teaches the Tuatha Dé Danann the skills of plowing, sowing, and reaping. In this way, he's credited with bringing agricultural skills to the ancient Irish. Lugh is also credited with instituting annual games, along the lines of the Olympic Games, and these games continue to be played in Ireland each year on the 1st of August. Lugh figures so prominently in Irish mythology that the Irish month of August is named Lunasa in his honor. One final mythological figure to mention is Bridget, also pronounced Brit. While not heroic in the strict sense, heroic figures are almost invariably men. Breit provides a good example of how women figure in Irish mythology. Breit was another member of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the daughter of the Dagda himself, and the wife of Bres, the Fomorian who taught the Tuatha Dé Danann how to plant and reap. In a famous legend, Breit is said to have invented keening, a combination of weeping and singing that accompanies mourning. Breit first keened upon the death of her son Ruadan, who was killed while acting as a spy for the Fomorians. She is also said to be the goddess of all things high and lofty, and that can be taken literally or metaphorically. For example, she's associated with high places such as hills, but she's also associated with the high arts such as poetry, medicine, craftsmanship, even skill in warfare. She is also specifically associated with fire in all its forms. Like other female figures, Breit's importance comes from her birth and her marriage into a royal family, her special magical abilities, and her association with high culture and craftsmanship. And like other prominent Celtic women and goddesses, she was transformed into a saint when the Christian Church gained power in Ireland. This was a common pattern. When Christianity moved into various communities, it often absorbed local places, figures, ritual traditions, and stories, putting a Christian twist on them. In this way, Christianity trumped local culture by transforming pagan elements into Christian elements. The Celtic goddess Breit was replaced by the Christian saint Bridget. In this way, the locals didn't completely lose their beloved Breit. They just reimagined her in a form more acceptable to Christianity. Irish mythology also includes unexpected characters, non-human characters. As I mentioned earlier, the myths of Ireland refer frequently to powerful magical items. These items often become animated, taking on personalities almost as if they were alive. We've already seen one example of this, the Dagda's harp, but the harp is not alone. The Tuatha Dé Danann are said to have brought 4 magical items with them to Ireland from their travels in the Northern Isles. These include the Stone of Fall, also known as the Lia Fall, the Spear of Lugh, the Dagda's magical cauldron, and the Sword of Nuada. The Stone of Fall is also known as the Coronation Stone. This is a real stone. It's located on the Hill of Tara in East Central Ireland, and this is where all the kings of Ireland were crowned until 500 CE. According to legend, this stone had magical powers. When the rightful king of Ireland placed his foot upon it, the stone was supposed to cry out with joy. This story resonates with the Arthurian legend regarding the sword in the stone. That stone was supposed to release the sword only into the hands of the rightful king of Great Britain. In both these stories, and in others like them, stones are animated, they have agency. The Stone of Fall is also empowered to rejuvenate an aging king. According to legend, Cuchulainn split the original Stone of Fall in 2 when it failed to recognize his protege as the next king of Ireland. It turned out, of course, that the stone was right. His protege never did rule as the next king. This image of an animated stone reflects the feeling that the very land of Ireland itself was invested in bringing rightful kings to power. Nature is alive in Celtic mythology. It contributes to the rise and fall of kings and entire races of beings, and it prophesies as well. The implication is that only a fool would ignore the landscape or attempt to control it. Instead, those who continue to value Celtic mythology consider the Irish landscape to be active, worthy of respect, maybe even a little bit of fear. In addition to the Stone of Fall, there are 3 other treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann. The second treasure is the Spear of Lugh. In some versions of Lugh's attack on Balor, he used this spear to blind Balor rather than the slingshot. According to another tradition, the tip of the spear had to be kept in a pail of water to keep it from spontaneously igniting into fire. In another tradition, the spear is described as alive and bloodthirsty, so eager to attack enemies that it flashed fire and struggled to be freed from its bindings. The third treasure was the Dagda's magical cauldron, known as the Undri, or the Cauldron of Plenty. This cauldron would provide food and drink to satisfy the hunger and the thirst of a worthy person. Finally, the fourth magical item the Tuatha Dé Danann brought to Ireland was the Sword of Light, said to have belonged to Nuada, king of the Tuatha Dé Danann, before they came to Ireland. The Sword of Light glowed, and no man could defeat it. The treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Dagda's harp are only a few examples of magical items that appear in Irish mythology, and they suggest a world in which highly crafted objects were precious. This is especially true of weapons, of musical instruments, and of any item forged from metal. Now, each of these items would have been very rare in the Irish Iron Age, from about 500 BCE until about 400 CE, about the time the Christian era began in Ireland. Weapons, finely crafted art, and musical instruments, and other iron implements made a dramatic impact on Ireland's life. The fascination with magic and superhuman powers is also reflected in the Irish mythological fascination with otherworldly beings. Irish mythology is chock full of references to non-human characters with magical powers. Unfortunately, we tend to think of cute prancing leprechauns and ephemeral fairies, but these lightweight, childish characters are not true to the otherworldly beings described in the ancient mythology, who can actually be dark and dangerous. Historically, the tradition refers to beings known as She, magical or otherworldly beings who live hidden away, traditionally in mounds of earth. She literally means people of the mounds. And one popular explanation for their origins is that they are the descendants of the Tuatha Dé Danann living in the other world to which they were banished, after the defeat by the Milesians centuries ago. Today they live largely apart from human beings in secret, and they can shapeshift, taking on different forms. The Irish don't use the word fairies to refer to these creatures. Instead, they tend to call them the good people or the folk. There's another important element in Irish mythology that we shouldn't omit. Irish mythology incorporates the number 3 over and over. This goes way back. Some archaeologists have pointed out that the triple spiral appears in the oldest Celtic stone carvings we know of. It appears on important ancient sites, especially burial sites. In addition, the number 3 is associated with several important mythological characters, especially female characters. For example, Brit, whom we mentioned earlier, is described as a triple goddess because she is one of 3 sisters who essentially function as one, kind of a trinity of 3 aspects of Brit. There are also 3 goddesses of Irish sovereignty, and the legends refer to 3 battle furies. The shamrock, a famous symbol of Ireland, is popular in large part because of its 3 leaves. The modern Irish flag has 3 color stripes. I could go on and on. It seems that in ancient Irish thought, the number 3 was considered magical. It had great powers. And this is important because when Christians came to Ireland, one of the doctrines they taught was the doctrine of the Trinity, God in the form of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's thought that one of the reasons Christianity was received in Ireland was because Irish mythology had taught for centuries that the number 3 was powerful. And now we can return to the Dagda and his harp, as he's about to sound the harp for the 3rd time. When we last saw our hero, he had reduced his enemies to tears and then to laughter with 2 soundings of his harp. With the 3rd and final sounding of the harp, the Dagda brought sleep to all the men, women, and children of his enemy. The sound was soft and quiet. pure and calm, the most powerful lullaby the world has ever heard, and each Fomorian fell asleep in his own way. Mothers reclined on the floor and in chairs. Children curled up in their mothers' laps, and warriors dropped to their knees. When the very last Fomorian fell asleep, the Dagda and his army departed, taking the harp with them. And soon thereafter, the Tuatha triumphed over the Fomorians. According to the legend, by doing this, they saved Ireland from death and destruction. The popularity of this story, and of the harp in particular, is clear in Irish imagery. A harp appears on Ireland's coat of arms, dating back to the 13th century. The harp was taken as the official symbol of the Irish Free State when it seceded from the United Kingdom in 1922. Throughout much of Irish history, the flag included a golden harp on a green background, and the current standard for the President of Ireland includes a gold harp on a blue background. The motto of the Society of United Irishmen, an 18th century organization seeking reduced interference from the British Crown, declared, "It is now strung and shall be heard," referring to the harp. Perhaps most well-known, Guinness beer includes a harp in its packaging, and the harp has been part of the Guinness logo since it appeared on the first bottle produced in 1862. And of course, Guinness manufactures harp lager. One last short story before we leave Irish mythology behind us. In 1359 CE, several members of the Royal Irish clan, the O'Donnell clan, were kidnapped by a rival clan leader, Cathal Og O'Connor. As part of the ransom, the O'Donnells were required to turn over an ancient manuscript of the Book of the Duncow, the text that provides the basis for most of what we now know about ancient Irish mythology. I love this story. Can you imagine the situation today in which one group would ransom another group for an ancient manuscript? The closest I can come to this is the movie National Treasure, in which Nicolas Cage steals the original manuscript of the Declaration of Independence. But even that comparison doesn't really work. In the end, Nicolas Cage's character was interested in gold and riches. In the 14th century Irish story, an actual historical event, the Book of the Duncow manuscript was valuable enough as a text in and of itself to trade men's lives for. That's how important the national mythology was. Whoever controlled the mythology controlled the culture. Perhaps that's the true magic of the Celtic world.